Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first webinar series for Latin American cheese, exploring cheese traditions. We are happy to have Jessica Fernandez joining us for today's webinar. But before we start, I also want to announce that we have simultaneous interpretation in Spanish for this webinar. So you can see below in your Zoom bar, you have kind of like a world icon. You might need to click on more and the three dots. And then once you get the word icon, you can click Spanish or English. Today, the interpretation will be in Spanish. Thank you very much for joining us. So now I'm going to give the screen to Jessica.
Hi, thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to talk about Mexican cheeses, but first, I'm going to introduce myself, but first I want to thank Carmen. She told me this a year ago when we met, and I thought it was a wonderful idea. So thank you very much for creating and advocating for the possibility of more people to be able to speak about the reality of cheese in their countries. So thank you very much. So I am going to introduce myself. I am Jessica Fernandez. I started 10 years ago as a cheesemonger, and I got totally obsessed with cheese. So after that, I started to be very curious about the way that cheese was being produced in Mexico. And the mainly glue for me, the most attractive part for me about cheese was people. So I fell in love with the cheesemakers. I fell in love with the process of, transporting cheese, meeting cheesemongers. And I think that was the most attractive part for me. And I start digging up into ways of finding the way I could travel and start making cheese. So I traveled first around Mexico, getting to know the cheesemakers that I used to work with. And then I got the opportunity to work in cheese in Spain and in the US. So I'm going to share some of my story, but also about, oh, wait, Andrew, I never know how to do this. Maybe I'm
You can go there.
Oh, yes, nice. So I'm going to talk about what it looks like, Mexican cheese in Mexico. It's some pieces of information and reality that I have come to and read about and really experience. And this is what it has been constructed for the past 10 years. So this is amazing. So first of all, I like to start with this phrase because not all tacos has cream and queso. I have seen that in the US, like pretty much all Mexican food has cream and queso. And it's not that I don't like cream and queso, but really like Mexican gastronomy is so much that just topping everything with tons and tons and tons of cream and queso. And the second phrase is, and not all cheese is for quesadillas. So how the story starts in Mexico? Well, there was a ship full of cheese that arrived with the Spanish colonizadores, and it's how we start to get used to drink milk. Husbandry in Mesoamerica was really non-existent. The Mexican diet was mainly foraging and some meats, and really mostly vegetarian. So we were very, very, very lactose intolerant. So the discovery of America was in 1492, but really there was not Mexico or New Spain back there. It was just trips that were going forward to Europe, and really the main activity was in the Caribbean islands. And it was not until 1521 that New Spain, what is most Mexican territory, was founded in 1521. So even then, really, there was not, sorry, it's very hot here. There was not really a full spectrum of what was really a culture, a main culture within the mainland parts of Mexico. There were a lot of indigenous cultures living and spread out across the whole continent of Mesoamerica. So the Narvaez expedition in 1528 really was the first one that adventured through the most like inland part of Mexico. It was a very harsh expedition. Most of the people that started it died in the process, but it was the first step towards start the history and the collection of data about what was in there. So really Mexican cheese is something a little bit new, and I'm going to talk a lot about what we perceive as tradition, sorry, and why it has changed and why it's important for us to really acknowledge some parts. So this is what Spanish North America looked like. This was the Hispanic territory before the independence of Mexico and the US-Mexico War. So the first information of cheese being made in Mexico was here. This is Monterrey. This is the northern state of Mexico. So this is how it looks like today. And in 1585, Diego Montemayor, the Nuevo León governor, we have some information in the book Virreyes y Virreinas Golosas de Nueva España. It says that he had a farm and he was making sheep's milk cheese. So the first animals were small ruminants. Small ruminants were easily transported and were more easily to manage. And also with the Spanish tradition, well, not tradition, but really like they were very used to work with sheep. It was, they brought this animal with them. This is quite funny because today in Mexico, we don't eat or consume a lot of sheep milk. And I'm going to explain why. But there's a change between this first recollection and the history of food models in Mexico. So Mexico was a very complicated country. We basically had a lot of conflicts, like violent conflicts, armed conflicts for 200 years in a row. So that's a lot of time for a country to be in constant conflict. And we did have very few development, like economic, socially, culturally speaking, during that era. So really our story is more modern, but we have some things that were taken from the past and try to rescue them. So what is tradition? So tradition is result of many factors, but for Mexicans, I came up with this diagram. It's some tools. So the story that I was telling you, Mexico was a territory that had a constant conflict after the start of the independence. So a lot of the developments surrounding dairy were not available in Mexico until the 19th century. So we didn't have a lot of tools. Even nowadays, it's hard for us to export certain machines, ingredients, tools for cheese making. So many of the tools were invented locally or they were adapted from other food systems that already were in place, or even not food. I'm going to talk about a cheese that used some materials that were used in making another type of food. The economy. So our economy is also relatively new. We were a country that moved, had a lot of political movements. We were a colony, there we were an empire, then we had, we were a republic, now we are a republic, but the economy has shifted constantly. Also, Mexico is a country where there's a lot of, I forgot the word, okay, let me remember. It's an area where there's a huge gap between the richest persons and the poorest one. So our economy really on the afford level that you will say people have in their households is low income. Most Mexicans are low income families. Geography, well, we have a very hot country. It's very hot, and in some areas it's very humid. So making cheese is challenging if you don't have the refrigeration tools, and also that makes it very expensive. So a lot of the cheeses answer to this geography, right? What was the safest cheese? What was the most easy way of making it? And really about the idea of preserving the milk so it could be a source of protein and nutrition. The animals that we had, it all started with small ruminants, but then we started switching to cows. We even have one criollo cattle that it has been widely exploited in Mexico because it's a double purpose cattle. But then we introduce the big dairy breeds that start happening in the 70s, and it grew like considerably in the 80s. And after we signed NAFTA, it was widely influenced by our agreement with North America. And the bacteria, the ones that exist and we have uniquely to our cheeses, 80% of cheese in Mexico is being made with raw milk. So it's interesting to really understand the main factor, the main flavor contributor that bacteria has in our cheeses. And well, I already talked about the climate. So these are the factors that kind of affect our tradition. So this is what it would look like today if we had an approach, because there's not an official division of regions of cheese in Mexico. We don't even have an official cheesemakers, a census, sorry, of cheesemakers. We don't know how many cheesemakers there are in Mexico. Most of the data that we have is for the commercial chambers of the big brands, but there's not national official census or association for artisanal cheesemaking. So the numbers are an approximation. The most reliable ones are being made by universities and by research centers. So that work is very important and is vital for us. 98% of the milk that is produced in Mexico nowadays is cows. We have some goat milk, and the less representative is sheep. Before the Civil War, and even in the beginning of the 19th century, goat was a widely owned animal in Mexico. A lot of people had goats in their house. And some of the traditional recipes really started as a goat cheese. But when cows outnumber goats considerably, as you can see in this diagram, so the recipes had to be adapted to cow's milk. So most of the cheeses in Mexico now, the traditional recipes are cow's milk instead of goats. So this is the numbers that the economy, well, the official recount for cheese making production. And if you see, we don't have a sheep one. Government apparently doesn't think that you can make cheese with sheep milk, even though it's delicious. So they just count the sheep as meat ones. They just have a data for cow's milk production and goat milk production, which is sad, but we really, I wish, and I guess that as I say we, because that's what we do in the Coalition of Cheese. I'm going to talk about that later, the Mexican Coalition of Cheese. We will love to really have that number being included in the production, because it's important, and there's a growing tendency for producers to start working with sheep milk, and it's very interesting. So this is the data for Canilec. Canilec is a chamber of commerce of the main milk producers in Mexico. So these are the numbers for 2023 of the percentage in production. So you will say, we could say that these are the most consumed cheese in Mexico in 2023. Double cream cheese, it's not like the French style in Mexico. Double cream really is a lactic set. That was originated in the southern states, the most tropical ones. We have the panela, the Chihuahua. Chihuahua is Mennonite cheese, and the amarillo is Kraft singles, or a version of it. So, our story with cheese starts 400 years ago, when Italian immigrants, well, it starts earlier, but the oldest recollection of a recipe that is still being made today is cotija cheese. And that story started 400 years ago with Italian immigrants that arrived to work in the mines in Jalisco and Michoacan. So they brought some recipes with them. A lot of people like to compare cotija with Parmigiano, but cotija is a hard-pressed cheese. It's not a cooked one. It can have some recollection in terms of aroma, in terms of even the crumbly part of it, but it's a different way of doing it. So the cheese was so valuable that at some point we have some records showing that it was used to pay taxes. This is the anatomy of cotija. It's a 22-kilo wheel. It is a high-altitude cheese, 1,700 meters above sea level. It's made in the transhumancy model. It's raw milk and it's farm-fed. Cotija cheese, the one that is still being made in the mountain, has something called a collective brand. Mexico doesn't have any denomination of origin for any cheese, but the most similar thing that we have is these collective brands. The difference is that the collective brand belongs to the Association of Cheesemakers, and it's not something that you can apply for. You have to be part of the association. So this is how it is made and where it is made. This is the mountainous part of Jalisco and Michoacan. This is the small cow that makes cotija. I'm gonna talk about it. And it's only made in the rain season. So it's a very delicate balance, and it's the oldest cheese that has stand the pass of time. So these are some of the bats that were used to, these are photos that were taken for information. Most cheesemakers have changed to stainless steel because it's more practical, but these were the original bats. Some have 200 years old, and some years ago, the cheese was even being made in the same way. Cotija needs to have at least 3 months to be called cotija. And after the season ends, the cheesemakers go back to the town, to this place called El Mesón de Cotija, to storage the wheels. So this is a new process that was incorporated like 20 years ago. In the 19th, this cheese, cotija, was sent to participate to a contest in Italy. But the cheesemakers and the director of the Mesón de Cotija, Esteban Barragan, decided to add a new step to the cheesemaking process, that was to age the wheel. So he kept the wheel, I think he kept it for the contest for 4 months, and the cheese came back with the prize for best foreign cheese. So they decided that was a valuable step to addition to the traditional cheese making process. this is the skinny cow. So Mexico has criollo cattle that is used in the South states. Also, the cow that you saw in the cotija picture is a variant of this type of breed. So it was originated by the Spaniards in the Caribbean islands, but they brought this cattle inland, and it started to be exploited in Mexico between the 16th and 18th century. It's very popular because in the south areas, it's called tropical criollo dairy cattle. It's high temperature tolerant. They are very resilient animals. They have low calf mortality. It has high concentration of solids and good volume by lactation. So it's a very convenient animal for you to have. And also, the temperatures and humidity and the conditions in some rural areas are very harsh for other breed to pretty much exist. There are some exceptions because now there's a major investment for some people that can afford high-tech facilities. So you now can see Jersey cows living in Chiapas, something that was difficult to imagine a few years ago. But now apparently Europeans like the heat. So I'm going to talk about panela. This is why I like to talk about the cheese, because it's the result of simultaneous factors that were almost accidents, but now it is part of the Imaginarium. Panela cheese was a cheese that was made as a house cheese, kind of speaking. After our civil war in Mexico, almost all roads and railroads were basically destroyed, obliterated. So food chains were forced to be locally developed. So people start making cheese really just incredibly super small amounts locally. So panela was is a very easy recipe to make, and it was a way of stretching the milk, and it was being made locally. So the cheese was made traditionally with raw milk, and they just added rennet. It's like when people ask me, what is it? Well, now it's a cheese jello. Why? Because in the 80s, Mexico had a considerable problem with tuberculosis and brucella, and the government changed the law and made raw milk cheeses illegal. So now they were forcing the cheesemaker to pasteurize, but cheesemakers in Mexico, most are, they have very low levels of education. So some basic concepts around science, dairy science, are very hard for them to understand. So they didn't understand that the flavor or what a milk culture is. So they didn't knew that they had to add cultures because they were being killed in the pasteurization. So they started making the cheese the same way without adding cultures, and they switched to a brand, to microbial rennet. This is a brand that is widely available all over Mexico. Everybody uses the same brand because it's more convenient and it's more easy for you to find it pretty much everywhere. So this number of accidents and circumstances change the cheese entirely, like the profile, the flavor, and now it's an entirely different cheese. And that way was kept, and now everybody makes the panela this way. Like, we could add cultures now, but no one do it because the flavor needs to be like this. Everybody's used to this flavor now. It's produced all over Mexico. And now the other thing that is also very interesting is about what is queso fresco, because fresh cheese basically is cheese that you can eat basically almost from the bat. but it's a category, and even some brands have claimed the name, but really, queso fresco in Mexico is a lot of things. So I made this matrix of Mexican cheese, and as you can see, there's a lot of styles. I made it a little bit more technical because it's important, because they can be very different. So they are either an acid coagulation or an enzymatic one, and the level of humidity is also considerable. So the ones that are acid sets are on the left, and those are being made in the south of Mexico because it's a very hot area and it's very high humidity. And the temperature is almost, well, actually it's hot all year long. So you have double cream cheese, that is a lactic set. You have bola de cocingo, that is a lactic set, but it's a dry one. And you have jocoque. Jocoque is labne, but is widely consumed in Oaxaca. And even in northern states of Mexico is also very widely consumed. Quesillo is in the middle because it's a semi-high humidity cheese. It's a pasta filata, but for us will be considered also fresh because you basically can eat it as soon as you finish pulling and salting. The panela one and the aro are on the right because it's an enzymatic set with a high humidity. So as you can see, our cheeses are very, very, very different, but we have a lot of fresh cheeses in Mexico, as in other countries. So that's why the category and the name is very important for us to start differentiating them. What is manchego? That's another funny story. So manchego really is a Spanish cheese, but we have a Mexican manchego. What is a Mexican manchego? It's a cheese being made with cow's milk. It's a cooked paste. It's a semi-hard, semi-pressed, sorry, and affordable. So this cheese was invented in the 80s. It was invented as an industrial cheese by a Chilean technical cheesemaker. So it's very funny story because when we were signing a trade agreement with the European Union, the Spaniard Manchego denomination of origin was arguing that we were trying to steal the name. But we were like, well, that's impossible because it's an entirely different cheese, has nothing to do one with the other. Like in Mexico, most people don't know or has never tried in their entire life the Spanish Manchego. So we invented the cheeses in the 80s, and the denomination from Manchego, it was originated in 1986. So we basically started using the name before. At the same time, it's not that we were trying to steal the name, but we were using it at the same time before the denomination of origin actually was created. So we won the argument, and Mexico can have their Mexican Manchego. So, well, at least something for us, right? This is how it looked like. You can see it's a very different cheese. It's not aged. It doesn't have a rind. It's really a massive produced cheese, has different applications. So it's a very funny story. And the other one that is very widely known, the quesillo. And why I call it the girl who ruled the world? Because we Mexicans like to tell stories and sometimes are a little bit unrealistic. So quesillo is one of the hardest cheeses to be made. And I think Carmen can attest that. You need to be a very highly technically trained cheesemaker for you to make it without tools. So the story of quesillo says that there was a little girl in Oaxaca and their family were making cheese. So the story says that the cheese will start to get burned. And I don't really know why you will start to burn a cheese, but apparently the cheese will start to getting burned. And she got scared. So she poured water to the burning cheese. And because the cheese started melting, she tried to rescue the cheese by taking out of the vat or the pot. I don't know what they were using. And she realized that the cheese started stretching. And that's how Oaxaca was made. That's incredibly unrealistic. That's impossible. And really, what happens is that this cheese is probably very likely, we don't have an official document or any traceability, but it's really, really, really likely that this cheese was brought to Mexico by Lebanese immigrants. Because in Oaxaca, in the area where this cheese is produced, there was a great and important migration. It was an important migration point for Lebanese in the beginning of the 19th century and the last, 18th and 19th century, but mostly the beginning of the 19th century. So this cheese is now a very important part of our gastronomy, but it has a very important immigrant background. And it's important for us to reconcile that story, because Mexican gastronomy is a blend of many things. And we have a lot of immigrants giving to our story. And it's important for us to acknowledge that. So this is the story of quesillo. And I want to talk about a retrospective in what is rescuing the tradition. We talk a lot about traditional cheese making. And in Mexico, the story is not new, but the things, when we start collecting that story is about cheese, it's recently new. We don't have a lot of records. It's hard for us to find information, historic information. So it's really an interpretation and an approximation, and we are gathering the pieces about what was traditional. Some cheeses are completely lost. So really, we don't know how many cheeses have ever existed in Mexico. A lot of the documents were lost during the independence and the Civil War. The cheeses that we know the story about is the one that are still being produced and that have survived the pass of time. And now, this new perspective that it needs to be taken into consideration is that the recollection and the story about the cheeses has been made by different actors, but it's also very important for us to start considering what these people need to tell about the story that they need to be told, right? Because when we are clinching or trying to stay and say, oh, it is traditional, we need to preserve it that way, we need to understand and also recognize that there's a price being paid for this tradition to persist. This happens, the most important example is cotija cheese. Cotija cheese is a cheese that we love. It's traditional, but there's a very high price in terms of the production model that needs to be paid for this cheese to exist. And we need to really ask ourselves, is that the only way that we can preserve that important cheese that has 400 years of history? Or there's another way, there's another possible way to really start seeing the way we see cheese? Because the model that the way that we eat cheese, the way that we consume cheese in Mexico right now is very detached from the connections between you and the people that is actually growing the food, milking the cow, producing the cheese, aging the cheese, transporting the cheese. What it takes for you to do it, there's a disconnection. So a lot of the opinions and policies that are being made is not taking everyone into consideration. And we need to start asking that, at least from the way that we see Mexican cheeses, at least the way that we see what we call traditional. Who am I talking about? Well, really pretty much everyone, from the people that is growing the food for the cows, for the people that is making the cheese, for the people that is transporting the cheese. And we as consumers really need to start looking back and saying, I love my traditional food, but we need better ways to preserve it, because there's a very high price in some traditions that need to be rethinked. So now the word food sovereignty it starts to resound around Mexican food systems, and cheese is not it's not the exception, right? I was telling the story yesterday at the class that one of the main challenges for cheese is continuity. But when you ask about continuity, you also need to ask, what are you want to continue? What are you asking these people to keep on with? Because last year we lost, Mexico lost three cheesemakers, well, two cheesemakers and one Esteban Barragan, that is an affineur. They were very important for our community. But when you go back there and then you ask the continuity of it, then you ask yourself, these two cheesemakers passed away. They were rural cheesemakers, and it was a very hard conditions to make cheese. So when you ask, am I really asking someone else to go after that life? That's something that that we need to start questioning, and we need to start having better conditions and as a whole piece, as a community, saying, how can we improve these conditions so we can ask them to continue? It's not just about wanting to continue. We need to provide better ways. So this is a chain that will ideally exist as a value chain, because you have the milk producers, then you have the cheesemaker, then you have the affineur, you have the distributors, and then you have your cheesemongers. In Mexico, basically, the one that makes the cheese is everything but this. So you milk, you make, you age, and you send, distribute, and do everything. So it's hard. It's very hard work. And that makes the cheese considerably expensive. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But we need, at least in Mexico, it needs to be like really rethink. We need to rethink this. So who moved my cheese? It's not about the book, but it's a nice name. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we identified, because that's also important of tradition, right? Memory, sensory. What we're used to try, what we're used to consume, and why it's important for us to really analyze it. So this is a diagram of flavors, and I made, this is on the left, you're going to see Mexican cotija. I made them myself. It's hard for me to kind of put flavor in a quantitative way because it's so subjective, but I tried. So on the left, it will be considered the mountain cotija, right? And on your right is industrial cotija, right? So there's a considerably difference between one flavor and the other. And the more you perpetrate, or I mean, not perpetrate, but the more you sell the one on the right, the flavor and the people, the perception of your public, of your audience is going to change. So I have seen it. I have seen people that try mountain cotija and they say, oh no, just this cheese is too intense. It's too barny. What does it taste like that? And the way they eat it start to change. I mean, I also have heard positive feedback, like, oh, it's amazing. I didn't know cotija could taste like this. So it's important for us to really not impose a way of eating, because you can like the one on the right. I agree totally. I mean, one of my guilty pleasures is to eat Cheetos. I like them. But I'm not gonna say it's the most nutritious food on the planet. I need to recognize that. So we need to start saying, okay, so this is a difference. This is one product and this is the other. They're not interchangeable. And that's important for you to preserve, at least for Mexico, to preserve tradition, or to say, we want to preserve what Mexican cheeses taste like. Because this is important for continuity and also important for the cheeses to be preserved. Because if you don't know what a thing should taste like, that you cannot replicate the recipe. This is for queso adobera, and this is for a provolone dolce. So some cheeses and some ways of us to consuming cheese can resemble to other traditions around the world, because we have similarities. At the end, we have incorporated knowledge from different parts of the world. This is bola de cocingo, the lactic set. I think some of you have already tried the cheese. And this is fresh goat. So we really need to identify the cheese and really to start looking at what we are really looking in terms of quality, sensory quality in a good product. Mexico doesn't have, how do you call it? They asked us yesterday, what was the name?
Standards of identity.
Exactly. Mexico doesn't have standards of identity for the varieties. So we were actually talking about adobera, right? What is adobera? I have seen, I don't know, 5 different cheeses that people call adobera. So it's just an interchangeable name. You know, it's like saying taco. Everything can be a taco, but there are some rules that need to be respected, like not putting mole and guacamole in the same taco. You're going to go to hell if you do that. Please don't do that. So when you start understanding these points of connections, then you start to kind of really unfolding and understanding the profile of Mexican cheeses. So we were talking about yesterday the uses, and if they can be changed or they can be similar. And I have worked in these diagrams for a couple of years because it's important for me to make graphic the way that I explain cheese, because I think it's a nice tool. And also I have answered myself so many questions. So when you think in use what can be made in terms of cheese, there are points, texture, flavor, and aroma, and even uses. They can be changed, but at the end, they are different cheeses, and they need to be recognized. So this is bola de cocingo, and this is crema, and they share textures. Two cheeses that share texture and saltiness level is cotija and pecorino. So cotija is more close to a pecorino than a parmigiano. So that's very interesting. And this is the traditional uses. I hope you like this nice how do you call it, diagram that I did. So quesillo is a pasta filata that traditionally is used in quesadillas, fillings and melting, but you could use adobera. Queso panela is an enzymatic without cultures. It's crumbled, pan grilled. You can eat it by itself, but you can also use queso de aro. Cotija is a hard press, it crumbles, but in Mexico, añejo and cotija is an interchangeable name. Some can be very, very similar. The manchego, Mexican manchego, is a semi-hard cooked paste, and it's usually used for browning and gratin, and you can use menonita. We have Mennonites in Mexico. It's a very large community, and that cheese is being made in the north. Rexon is ricotta. Stuffing, you can use it for tlacoyos and gordita, and we don't have an alternative for that one. But cheeses can have different uses, but also they have flavors, textures, aromas in common. So what is new cheese making? Because that's also that has starting to emerge. We have new cheesemakers, a new wave of younger cheesemakers that are start to experiment, and they have a more independent, creative voice. So this is how it looks like, right? So if you have local sourcing and ancient techniques, then you have Mexican gastronomy. If you have outsourced techniques and ancient techniques, you have fusion cuisine. If you have local sourcing and outsourced techniques, then you have contemporary cuisine. And if you blend all of it, then you will have the new Mexican gastronomy, right? So we have local sourcing, we have ancient techniques, and we have outsourced techniques. And we are bringing everything together to create a new vision of what we identify with, because at the end, our story is still being written day by day. And there are some things that we would really, really, really like. So this is a washed rind cheese that was washed with beer. This is like an experiment that a cheesemaker from Querétaro, Gabriela, tried to do during the pandemic. And this is, she learned how to make cheese in the US. She studied in the US, but she decided to go back to Mexico and start making cheese there. So that's what I referring when you really have you're importing knowledge, you're importing techniques, but then you want to experiment that in Mexico, right? Because you are playing with all what it means to be in Mexico, the weather, the terroir, the socioeconomics, the culture. And this is another one of our cheeses. This is OVNI. This cheese was also born during the pandemic. It's an enzymatic set, a soft enzymatic set, and it's really if I have to simplify it, it will be like a rustic brie, right? She lets she lets the cheese to grow wherever the cheese wants, and creates a really nice rustic texture on the rind. It starts to proteolize once it starts aging. It has a really good flavor profile, and I really, really, really like it. But we also have new inventions, right? This is a little bit, on the other side, but this is ice cream that is being made with cheese, Mexican cheese. And this is a cheesemaker that learned how to make ice cream in Italy. And he really likes to use Mexican ingredients. So this is an ice cream made with cheese and maracuya. So then we start seeing these blends and these fusions start happening around Mexican cheeses, which is very exciting. Then all of these are Mexican cheeses. I made this board, and when I took the picture, I found it amazing. Amazing to see the change that has gone through the years. The one in the middle is a blue cheese they are not producing any anymore, so it's a shame. But to be able for you to have this type of cheese board only made with Mexican cheese is amazing. Really, like it means that cheesemakers are going to another place to start experimenting, and also it means that the market is allowing it, which is fantastic. These are all other types of Mexican cheeses that have emerged, and to see goat cheeses, wine rinds, lactic sets, soft ripened cheeses, wash rinds. We're in the point of start experimenting. Technically speaking, we are learning as a country, but I think we're gonna get there. And it's a little bit like the US probably 20 years ago. So I guess it's nice to see it, right? It's nice to see the market to born this way or to change. So I'm very excited to see what's gonna happen in 5-10 years. It's gonna be very cool. So also around this cheese making, not just experimenting, but a different way of trading cheese. So Navarro is a cheesemaker that is already exporting cheese to the US, Mexican cheese made in Mexico with traditional recipes that is being exported to the US. So it's a very exciting paradigm because he's exporting fresh cheeses. And it's very exciting because he really took this project as personal. And also Carmen and I, we have talked about the huge stigma that Mexican cheeses carry. And I really like to see a Mexican brand to take things to a different level in the care, the importance, the permits, the certification, and say, yes, we do awesome things. And I'm sorry for the very, 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 very bad word that I'm going to say, but it's like when Chicharito said, imaginemos cosas chingonas. So I think that this is amazing. I like to imagine this for the future of Mexican cheeses. This is a lottery that I work on relating Mexican cheeses, and I think it's a very cool one because every time that I get to make a new drawing of cheese, like burning, no, not burning, like giving birth, like naciendo, like, existing, it was incredibly exciting because the lottery keep growing, and the lottery was as the project started growing with the cheesemakers, I used to really, like send them, and the cheesemakers send them the pictures, and we start growing the project. And this lottery was an amazing way of really, like going back and reflect on how the industry has grown, how we have grown together. And we're a big country, but like in the US, we are, artisanally speaking, we're a small industry. So it's very cool. And I'm going to talk a little bit what has changed in terms of how we cooked and see Mexican cheeses in Mexico. So in the 20s, bueno, en el 2000, a big change, a big paradigm started, right? Enrique Olvera founded Pujol, one of the most famous restaurants in the world regarding Mexican gastronomy, high what table, high-end cuisine. And that's when traditional cheese started to be elevated, right? So we are not seeing the elevation of Mexican cheeses. And I'm gonna go back to some diagrams, but this is very interesting. So this is a dish that was made by Tania Aguilar. This is a custard made with bola de cocingo. It's a delicious dessert, delicious, really delicious. And she really wanted to portray and to explore the intensity of the Varney flavors of bola de cocingo and put them in a dish that requires more work, right? So he made this custard, and when you try it, it was delicious because bola de cocingo can have like banana aromas and can be barney, but it's also very buttery, but sour. You can even detect some maracuja sometimes. And the fact that you can translate this to a dessert was amazing. So this is one of my favorite dishes, and she made a beautiful job with it. So again, we got with cotija and pecorino because that was the thing that was used. So another dish that I really like is this risotto with mushroom and cotija. That's why I always say that it's more similar to pecorino than to parmigiano. This is also very delicious, and to be able to get to experiment these techniques with Mexican cheeses is amazing. Monterrey Jack and Menonita share melting point and texture, but it can also be made with a grilled cheese sandwich and Mennonite cheese. So this grilled cheese sandwich made with Mexican cheeses is amazing. I highly recommend for you to try it. So Mexican cheeses are evolving in the popular culture, but also in the way that we consume it, right? We are not just want to use foreign cheeses for these dishes, but we are saying, yes, we have Mexican cheeses that can be used, and that's amazing. Sin queso, por favor. This is a fun story about one of the main menaces for Mexican cheeses, that is the economy. So Mexican cheese in Mexico is expensive. This is in Spanish, but this is a diagram that shows that the differentiation between how we consume cheese in Mexico is related to the income, right? So cheese in Mexico is not a staple food in a way of speaking. It's not subsidized. It's expensive for you to get good quality cheese. And one of the main ways that the industry have found to do or to enter the market in this gap is to start making analog cheese and powder milk cheese that are very low quality, very in terms of nutrition, flavor, but they're very cheap. And now we have a new law that obligates cheese producers to label correctly in if it's cheese or not, but the restaurants are not forced to disclose this to customers when you are rating a menu. So when you go to a restaurant, you will find that the cheese is really not cheese. So when people tell me, oh, I'm sure you eat cheese every day. And I'm like, well, yeah, if I am in my house, I will eat cheese every day. But if I go out, I always say, please, without cheese. So it's sad for someone that loves cheese as much as I do, but this is one of the main menaces for Mexican cheeses, right? Because it's also, the flavor is terrible. Like the flavor of these cheeses are terrible. And the thing that this is my I love things in three. So this is the three main factors that they need to be considered to preserve a tradition, right? Well, to preserve Mexican cheese. So you need a tradition, a set of practices, knowledge, something that you can recognize. Then you need to know how to do it. But savoir-faire is not just about doing it. It's also about knowing what it's supposed to taste like. So sometimes maybe you can have the recipe, but if you really don't know what it tastes like, you're never going to be able to make it right. And then we need to have a market for that cheese, because you can have the best cheese in the world, but maybe you don't have a market for it because people are more used to industrial cheese. Maybe people doesn't know what to do with that cheese. Maybe it's too expensive. Maybe it's too hard for you to take that cheese out of the place of origin. So many factors. And you cannot have Mexican cheese with any of this. You cannot have without the savoir-faire, because if you don't know how to do it and you don't know how it tastes, well, you can have a market and you can have tradition, but it's not really the authentic cheese. And if you have savoir-faire and a market, but then you don't have a set of traditions, someone that you can recognize it, then it's not a traditional cheese. It's a good cheese, but we don't know what it is. So this is very important for us to preserve and to move forward with Mexican cheeses, and it's something that we need to consider. So I'm gonna, oh, sorry, what am I doing? So I'm gonna, how can I stop presenting, because I want to see if someone has a question. Oh yeah, I see it. Okay.
So any questions? Anyone in the audience will have questions? Alguien que tenga preguntas, se puede traducir también español, inglés. We can translate English, Spanish if anyone has a question.
I have one.
Tell me, yes.
Hear me?
Hello?
Hi, yes.
Yes, tell
Do
me.
you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, great. I was wondering if you can explain about you were talking about the price that the tradition it's like in Mexican that some cheeses need to you are paying a big price. So what do you mean with that? You say something about the cotija and what the tradition is for this cheese, how does the manufacture of this cheese, and I would like to know what do you mean with the price that you
Oh,
pay?
okay. So what I was saying, the high price that it needs to be paid is that cotija cheese faces a lot of challenges. Like one of the main identifiers is the cultura ranchera, they say like that, but it's a very harsh way of life. So cotija is very connected. It can be not one without the other. So when I say about it's a human price of them living that life. The last couple of years have been brutal in terms of security, because there are a lot of drug cartels now getting inside the Sierra, and they're kicking out the producers out of their ranches. It has become very, very, very dangerous for them to keep making cheese. And that's why I talk about when I say the price. Like, do we really want them to keep risking or living that life in order for us to have that cheese? That's what I was talking about.
Oh well, is sorry if I don't understand. So because I'm foreign, I'm not Mexican, so it's quite new. All the information, everything that you have said today is everything new. So thank you so much for the information. I really love your presentation.
Thank you.
But again, but is that in my mind for me is like if you do the cheese in this place or in the other place, you don't if you use the same technique and the same ingredients, the taste is not going to change. Why this life means for for cotijo? I mean, why people want they live in that way for make this type of cheese? Do you?
Oh, yes, of course. It's something that I also was wanting to kind of reflect is that there's a price, a human price, a human of practices around some traditional foods, because we need to, for me at least, it's a constant question. Like I question myself, like, what is that? What is it that we are like asking some people to do in order for us to have this traditional way of living, right? Not way of, sorry, these traditional foods. So yes, the cheese can be moved. I mean, basically, I know this is, it's going to sound like a sacrilege, but scientifically speaking, we could take the flavor and just replicate it in a laboratory. Like we could just do that. But I think for us as Mexicans, I'm talking the way that Mexican cheese tradition is very rooted in the processes, in the systems that exist for us to have certain types of food. You know, like we like to say that handmade tortillas taste better than machine tortillas. But for you to have handmade tortillas requires you hours of work. And someone has to put in those hours. Someone has to make the work. But basically it's the same, right? Because it's the same process. You nixtamalize the corn, you put it to a grinder, you make the dough, and you put it on the machine. And for you to have tortillas from the machine, you just have to get out of your house, walk probably 1 block. You will find a tortilleria, buy a pound of tortillas, go back to your house and eat them. That's it. It will take you, I don't know, 20 minutes. But if you really are into the exercise of doing them by hand, you need to grind the corn. Let's say that you got your corn already dried and it's already grinded. So you will have to boil it. You will have to nixtamalize it. You will have to wait. Then you will have to grind the dough. You will have to make 1 tortilla by 1 tortilla, and it's going to take you hours. And someone needs to put in those hours. So that's what I mean when someone is paying the price for our traditions.
Understood. Yeah. Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes.
And I this is not a question. Maybe I as I told you, all the information is very new for me, and I saw some of the reference, but most of this information is done by you. So so I would like to ask maybe if you have this information written in somewhere or other.
Oh yes, I can send some sources to Carmen. Sorry, and I forgot to put my last two slides, so it's important. Sorry, just let me put it here so I can explain. Sorry. Can you take that out of the presentation?
Well, we wait. I just want to say that our time is off if you want to leave, but if Jessica is fine and she can leave, we have 2 more questions. I'm happy to stay, but I don't know if you have time. Yeah, fine.
Don't worry. So I just want to say thank you for everyone in here. Like I would like to share some of the cheesemakers that I respect. Also, the people that has helped me through all of this a lactic adventure, and also to recognize my partners of the Mexican Coalition of Cheese. We have been trying to, we have a great group, and we're trying to be more consistent about it because we have an amazing background. What you put us all together is amazing. And we really are eager to share like a more consistent sources for these types of information, because at the end it's like all over the place, right? It's like what I was saying, it's hard to even find some data. So I really appreciate, sometimes we just literally write in the group like, oh, do you have this information? And it's like, oh yeah, I have it. So yeah, I'm working on that. I want to start making to have a place, an online resource for people to can access and to know more about cheese. But if you want to follow these arrobas in Instagram, there are Mexican cheesemakers. They make great cheese. There are great projects. I also have amazing support from different resources. And thank you very much. So if anyone has another question.
We have like one question in the chat, but we have like 1 minute. So if there's time for Alexandra Jones is saying that there are subsidies for cheese production in Mexico and that producers must label products made with powdered milk. Are there any other incentives or structural changes that are intended to support traditional small-scale cheesemaking? What would you like to see happen in that respect?
There's a very interesting book that I think you're gonna like it. It's about NAFTA and how it changes the way Mexico produces food. We used to have subsidized agricultural practices. They already existed at some point. It's something that we need to kind of go back to. I would love to have some resources, and also this is something that Carmen and I agree with like a lot, is we need more resource for education. It's the information and the education that cheesemakers in Mexico can access to is very limited. And it will be also very nice for us to have the tools for them to learn, and to professionalize the oficio, to dignify cheesemaking. So I hope it happens soon, to have these tools available.
Well, thank you very much. I wrote my email in case you have any more questions. I can direct them to Jessica. And thank you so much, Jessica, for your great presentation and for opening up a webinar series. So please keep in mind that we have another webinar coming up next, let me share it, next Thursday, again at 4 p.m. Pacific time. So October 17, and we'll be talking about Brazil styles. And thank you so much for Milk Culture and Pacific Coast Coalition for making this happening. See you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.